Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the globe today. My name is Roberto Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the Gfcc. If this is your first time here, the Gfcc, it's a global membership, multi-stakeholder organization. We have members that are corporations, universities, private sector, councils, and industry bodies, and government agencies. Combining those four segments and our fellows, we have a footprint today in more than 30 countries. We're here today for the Gfcc Global Innovation Summit, and this is the second segment of our first day of event. It's great to have you. Please be part of the conversation. You have a chat space on the upper right side of your screen. Please share your comments, share your questions, join us for this conversation. So the Global Innovation Summit, it's a combination of a process that started at the beginning, the first semester of 2021. Through the Gfcc Frame the Future series, we hosted members from 26 different countries to gather ideas, recommendations on how we can weave 5 future-defining topics into future competitiveness strategies. Those topics are innovation, resilience, sustainability, inclusiveness, and partnerships. In addition to those speakers from 26 different nations, we had people in attendance sharing ideas, sharing insights, in many cases sharing best practices, links to the projects, initiatives that they have. And they came from 62 different countries, more than 1,000 participants. During the summit, we're going deeper into those 5 future-defining topics. As I said, this is the second segment. We started this morning. We had 2 panel conversations. We launched Gfcc Thought Products in the morning. And we also had an amazing keynote by Jim Clifton, the Chairman and CEO of Gallup Group. If you missed the morning session, please stay tuned because we will soon have that online at the Gfcc YouTube channel for you to check. Let me briefly comment about Gfcc Thought Products that were launched this morning, and I know that my colleagues will pull those on the screen. We launched the Gfcc 2021 Global Competitiveness Principles. They result, the principles, from a year-long engagement with Gfcc members. We get dozens of inputs on the principles. Every year, we review the framework that was originally launched in 2010, and we create a new statement of principles. So please go to the Gfcc website and download the principles. They can serve as, they can provide valuable guidelines for future competitiveness strategies. You have a button on the lower right side of your screen where you can click, and the link there will take you to the Gfcc website. We also launched the Gfcc Frame the Future report. It summarizes the main findings and recommendations from 10 Frame the Future sessions, and it includes goals to drive future competitiveness through innovation, resilience, sustainability, inclusiveness, and partnerships. Check that out and join the conversation. We're tweeting about the session using the GIS 2021 hashtag and the Future Competitiveness hashtag. This afternoon, we're having 2 sessions. The whole summit is organized around those 5 future-defining topics that are coming with you. We're getting started now talking future inclusiveness. Following that, we're having a leadership conversation on resilient societies, future resilient societies. And we're closing this segment with a panel conversation on future sustainability. So coming up, let me provide quickly a background on this. So future inclusiveness, I think there are 2 goals that we launched that are included on the Frame the Future report that mention that. Make digital infrastructures, devices, and skills accessible and affordable to all citizens, and act on purpose in all situations to advance diversity and inclusion. Coming up, we have a session that was sponsored by Lockheed Martin Corporation. We're thankful and happy to partner with Lockheed Martin that has also sponsored one of the Frame the Future sessions. Let me briefly introduce the speakers and turn to Dan. Future Inclusiveness will be moderated by Dr. Paul Robin. Paul is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Commercialization at the University of California, San Diego. We have Dr. Eric Smith. Eric is the Director of Artificial Intelligence, Data Analytics, and Exploitation at Lockheed Martin Advanced Technology Center in California. We have Dr. Jay Walsh. Jay is Interim Vice President for Economic Development at the University of Illinois. We have Mr. Dylan Jones. Dylan is the President of Pacific Economic Development Canada, an agency that was recently created. He's the Interim President of Prairies Economic Development Canada, and until very recently, he was the Deputy Minister for Western Economic Diversification. And joining us from Zimbabwe, we have Ms. Tofara Chokera. Tofara is the founder and CEO of Tofara Online, a company that has been working with SMEs and women in Zimbabwe to include that in the digital economy. We will have a vignette with that. So let's get started. And Paul, thank you so much for moderating. The floor is yours.
Is that me?
Okay, go.
Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, wherever you are in the world. My name is Paul Robin. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Commercialization at the University of California in sunny San Diego. First of all, I'd like to thank my panelists, for participating. I'd like to thank the Gfcc for inviting me to participate alongside these very accomplished colleagues on the panel. They will introduce themselves in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to set the scene before we got going into the questions. The other thing I'd like to do is actually thank the Gfcc for prioritizing this topic of inclusiveness in their Frame the Future report. For those of you who've read that report, you will of course be aware that future inclusiveness is one of the 5 imperatives that the Gfcc have identified that must be addressed if we're going to build a better future for all. Within that framework, they've identified 2 goals, one being making digital infrastructure and skills more broadly accessible, and the second, acting on purpose to advance diversity. And we'll come back to those goals throughout the conversation today as well. So why future inclusiveness? Basically, the bottom line is we are wasting human capital. Half of the world's population doesn't even have access to internet, which is a shocking statistic. Most of our populations are not participating in our innovation economies. And this gap between the haves and the have-nots is just going to get wider as the world relies more and more on technology solutions. This is both an equity issue and it's a competitiveness issue. As an equity issue, we must address inclusiveness. If we're going to narrow those social divides, if we're going to narrow those wealth gaps, and if we're going to create economies that are strong, growing, sustainable economies into the future. As a competitiveness issue, there is no way that any of our countries are going to be able to continue to be competitive in a global economy if we don't address this issue of inclusiveness. As an example of that, in the United States, only 15% of inventors who submit patents are women, 15%, which means we are leaving out at least 2/3 of our population in this innovation economy. We have to identify the barriers to broader participation. We have to lower those barriers, and we have to come up with solutions that drive diversity. And that really is what the conversation is going to be about today. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my panelists to just very briefly introduce yourselves and give a few words on what future inclusiveness means to you. And I'm just going to pick you in the order of the boxes that I see on the screen, no particular order. So maybe we can start with Dylan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. I agree with you entirely that the GFCC is to be commended for this topic and for their continuing attention to inclusion. I personally believe that dealing everyone in is the most important opportunity of the 21st century. For me, it is job one. Many people see, and actually a lot of what happened in the 20th century was rooted in the idea that growth and inclusion were competing. And when you get to the hard public policy, they do compete sometimes. There's absolutely no question. But that zero-sum approach is a huge mistake. And if you try to do fairness without growth, you have to take something away from someone to give it to new people. It creates conflict. It's very difficult to do. Much more sensible is to do them both, is to pay attention to growth, but make sure you're leveraging that growth to drive fairness. So that for me is the top level point. And we are going to see lots of growth. If you actually look at what's happening right now in the economy, we're seeing all sorts of inflation pop up in interesting places around the world. A lot of that's driven by supply chain issues, which are driven by demand, putting pressure on disrupted supply chains. That's mostly on the goods side, but there's tons of pent-up demand on the services side. That's not this discussion, but I just want to say, we're missing something if we don't understand that there is a lot of growth coming up and we have a choice. And the choice is, are we going to leverage that growth to advance fairness, or are we going to do growth without fairness? Which you can do. It's hard to do fairness without growth, but you can do growth without fairness. And my advice is we need to be laser focused on making sure we do not miss the post-pandemic opportunity. So how do we do that? I'll just lay out some things, but my main point is focus on the basics. We actually already know what we need to do. We used to say you learn to read and then you read to learn. Now maybe you can watch a video. We've got even more options, but that basic element is true. We need to focus on early childhood education, early childhood nutrition, basic core education, the access to broadband, and the hard work dealing with bias, right? And dealing it directly, right? Dealing with issues of racism directly, like that. Those are all the basics, and that's exactly where we need to be, in my view. And it's not a full formula, but it's a fantastic start and a mission that where I think we can make a profound difference. Not just in the medium term, in the short term. So that's where I would start.
Cool, thank you. And I'd like to go back to that issue of fairness later on as well. I think it's important. Eric, you're the next box on my screen.
All right, greetings everyone. I'm going to give you my perspective of inclusion from a fairly technical perspective. So I'm the director for artificial intelligence, data analytics, and exploitation at Lockheed Martin's Advanced Technology Center. And my directorate's objective is to build on today's state-of-the-art in AI and ML, and being guided by and bound by first principles understanding of the physical world, and deliver solutions in kind of a 1 to 10 year time frame that are impossible to deliver otherwise today. And that big complicated process starts with first understanding customers' problems, their operational, financial, schedule constraints. And so, for instance, while splitting the atom, we're going to go out, we're going to split the atom. We might consider that a major scientific achievement, but if our customers want their atoms whole, we've wasted an enormous amount of resources, and we've incurred this huge opportunity cost. All of the time we spent working on this atom splitting that we were convinced would be embraced and adopted is just lost. It's out the window. along with all the other time we would have otherwise invested, having spent, that we could have spent on problems that were of real interest and of real impact. So then the other side of the technology funnel, we understand now what the customer's needs are and what their sensitivities are, what their values are, what their constraints are. Go to the other side of this innovation funnel and consider the myriad of state-of-the-art technologies from which we might want to start building a solution or convince ourselves that a brand new technology is needed. So in that big, complicated process, inclusiveness is pervasive by my thinking of inclusiveness, which is, has a lot of dimensions to it. So first and foremost, it means for me as an innovator of technology that I need to deliver to the field and deliver something that works, it means knowing without question, without reservation, that one's own vision of the future is at best incomplete. And it means coming to every conversation, whether it's an internal employee at Lockheed Martin, a university or small business resource, somebody I meet on the street, coming to every conversation really ready to learn. And sincerely asking for and receiving information that we know may run counter to our own very closely held opinions. It means being able to effectively teach. When we see that, if we objectively look at the data in front of us, we know that a team member is headed down the wrong path. And effective here meaning that you can't cause barriers to go up in your language, in your tone, in your posture, or cause these defense mechanisms to kick in. So, in short, I think of inclusiveness as it's a continuous two-way growth and learning process for everybody.
Well, great point. Thank you. So up next, Tofara. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and this opportunity from the GICC is something that I'm really passionate about. So I'm a founder of an organization called Tofara Online, which is a digital marketing and innovation consulting trust. And our main objective is to empower women and young people to embrace digital marketing and emerging technologies, either for business growth or for career development. Our programs really are focusing on making sure that we give women equal opportunities to learn about technology. And to me, inclusivity gets back to how I grew up. I grew up in a small town in Zimbabwe called Gfcc. And in that area, there was no access to information and no access to technology at all. Up until university level, I had not seen a computer at all. I still remember at 20 years, that is when I saw a computer. And when I walked into a computer lab, and I was really amazed at such a thing. So there are still communities like that in Zimbabwe, in Africa, where there is no access to information. So as an organization, I believe that inclusivity should start from the marginalized communities. And this is where we are talking about organizations, the governments creating infrastructure for people to get access to information. Believe you me, the moment I discovered the endless opportunities that the digital space gives me, my life changed from then. But I'm looking at a society or at communities where there is still no infrastructure for people to get onto the internet and discover the endless opportunities that are there in the world. Connectivity to me is one of the things that should be really an objective when it comes to inclusivity. If you look at the programs that we are also doing at Tofara Online, which forge opportunities for women to become experts in the digital space, it's all about where we are, especially in Africa. If you look at the future jobs that are in Africa, 80% of the future jobs in Africa require a tech skill. And most of these tech skills, they're being taken by the men. And we are saying, you know what, we need to include women and girls at a young age so that at least we reduce the digital gender gap that is there. And, you know, to me, inclusivity is just going back to the roots and showing people from a young age that there is this thing called tech, and we can actually grab opportunities that come through adoption of technology for our career growth and for our business growth. I can also give an example of the disconnect that is there here in Africa when it comes to the academics and the real world. You know, the curriculums that are currently there in universities here in Africa, they're not equipping people to the world where there are no jobs. You know, someone walks out of university and there are no jobs, yet there are opportunities that can come through learning tech and other emerging technology skills. So we are saying that inclusivity should really start from the bottom, and the way we, disseminate information to marginalized communities or even communities that have not yet realized that technology can actually change lives. So that, to me, that is inclusivity.
Thank you. As somebody who works in a university, that really resonates with me also. Jay.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart and a significant fraction of what I do and what my office does. I'm fortunate to work within academia at the University of Illinois. Academia has the hope, the promise, somewhat the history of taking people out of unfortunate situations and moving their lives forward. So we've done this reasonably well, and frankly, we can do it better. The goal, as we're going to talk about more today, and certainly what I do regularly, is to drive growth with inclusion. Inclusive growth is absolutely part of what we're doing. I work in the University of Illinois system, which is 3 universities in Chicago, Urbana, and Springfield. And then I also work with the other 9 public universities across the state of Illinois. So there's 12 of public universities. And the mission, broadly read, of those is not only to provide education, but provide education, and excellent education at scale. So, this is not selective education. This is inclusive education. We try to take as many students as we can. And we also work with organizations around the state. Those are companies and not-for-profits, the incubators and the accelerators within the area around the state. We put together a network of all of this called the Illinois Innovation Network. And as I said, these are centered around the public universities. Inclusiveness is absolutely core to everything that we're doing. So within the city of Chicago, which is an incredibly diverse city, we have a number of programs looking at workforce development. We reach into the high schools. We reach into the community colleges. We reach into the universities for talent and to develop talent. So inclusiveness of folks is absolutely at our core. And our view is we want to break from the past and intentionally develop inclusive, equitable economic development and societal opportunities for all those across the state. I talked about the urban regions. We find very similar challenges in the rural regions of the state, which, in the United States, at least, we don't talk so much about the challenges that exist in rural regions, and I can certainly do that. Our goal is for all folks, certainly the younger folks in our communities, to see a path forward. And as a speaker earlier this morning talked about, to provide hope, to see a future 1, 2, 10 years down the line. Just
great.
Pass it back to you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you for those comments. So there's so much information in there and so many things that we could build out on. I'd like to focus in a little bit more now on the next question in terms of the barriers. You've alluded to them there certainly, what are specific barriers that currently exist and what can we specifically do to help lower those barriers? The first goal within the Frame the Future report is to make infrastructure, digital infrastructure and skills more broadly accessible across our populations. How can we advise the GFCC on what those barriers are and how to lower them? And really anybody who wants to take this, please jump in.
Well, can I kind of want to send a question to Farah's way that is related to your point, if I could.
Go for it. So,
Eric talked about customers, which is actually pretty foundational when you're doing economic development. You need demand. And so my question to Farah, just because I'm actually curious about it, is if we're thinking about success conditions, just park barriers for a second and flip it around. If we're thinking about success conditions, is it enough, like in the spaces where you work, is it enough to deliver to women key technology skills and there's actually going to be sufficient demand, like they will find customers on their own? So is that enough, just really giving them access to the internet and the toolkit and some basic skills and they'll do fine? Or do we have a second issue here, which is about the credentials that they need and, like other barriers that we've put up that sort of, separate them from customers? So I'm trying to understand whether from your perspective, you deliver skills, you deliver access, we're good, or whether we have more work to do.
I think currently we have got more work to do because getting skills to the women is not as easy like in other countries. I'll give you an example. Right now, when it comes to internet access, which is cheap and affordable, only 29 countries in the whole world has access to cheap internet. And you come here in Zimbabwe and any other African country, the internet is a problem. People are finding it difficult to learn online because of the expensiveness of the data and the access to internet. So it becomes the foundation, or like I can say the foundation barrier to say we want to give this. I believe that African women are really intelligent, but those barriers to do with internet connection, and you're going to find that learning a skill maybe in 6 months, it can take them a year. Why? Because at some point they cannot afford the data. So that is a barrier that needs to be addressed first. But in terms of the skill, once they get it, I tell you, we are brilliant people. We can actually execute our talents, our skills in the tech field with excellence. So that is what I can respond on that.
So what's the solution to expensive internet, basically?
Well, let me chime in here real quick, because
I think it's more about
this helps me get out of my box. I mean, what you were just talking about is almost entirely contrary to what I said my barrier is and how I think I get around that barrier. So this was my thinking. My main barrier, and everybody agrees on this point, it's access to the amazing talent around the world. The African women who are shut out of some of these jobs currently just because of access, that I see as my barrier. But from my perspective, I say, hey, first of all, I'm at Lockheed Martin. I have direct access to what I just wrote down out of the air was much, much, much less than 1/100% of the artificial intelligence and machine learning talent out there. I by definition have a 1% solution to the whole problem because I'm not getting enough input. And what I said looked good as a solution there was something like the Kaggle model. I love the Kaggle model for closing the gap. So that's being able to pose interesting challenges to experts around the world, where those experts can self-select. See, and this is the other problem here, Paul, in that you had mentioned only 15% of the patents are by men, or by women, sorry. When I say I'm going to put a challenge out there for people to self-select, we're again getting a biased sample because not everybody feels that they're in a position to say, yeah, I'm an expert, I'm going to do that for you. There was an internal study at Google some number of years ago wherein they noticed that men were getting promoted at a higher rate than women. And we said, hey, they said, hey, there's a problem here. Our managers are preferentially promoting men. No, it turns out that wasn't the problem. There was a little box that somebody would self-select on their performance form that said, I want to be considered for a promotion. I want a promotion and I think I deserve it. It was mostly men who said that. It wasn't the women. So self-selection by itself will bias the population that you're selecting from. And, you know, I kind of narrow-mindedly said, if I can utilize platforms like Kaggle and GitHub for sharing code and ideas, you know, all of that fabric that connects scientists or or citizen scientists around the world is there, and I just need to energize it and use it. And I think in the last 4.5 minutes, Tofara just told me that, you know, that's an incomplete solution. So that's how we get these people together.
Yeah, and I was going to follow up on that actually with you. I mean, you know, certainly new technologies are a solution, but in developing those new technologies, do we risk alienating more parts of the population? I mean, I sit in an innovation building, right? So I'm all for new technologies. But, you know, prototyping is now all in VR, but Oculus is expensive, right? That's just an extreme example. You know, how do we ensure this inclusiveness and fairness as we develop new technologies, which are there to provide solutions, you know, to make sure that they're not actually doing the opposite. So there is a question from the audience about fairness, and anybody can take this, but I know, Dylan, you mentioned this earlier, so maybe you want to. How do you measure and guarantee fairness in the workplace? And what are the biggest challenges in meeting those targets? And actually, it speaks to what you were just saying as well, Eric.
Maybe I'll just, look, this is a huge subject, you know, but I would just maybe make 2 observations. I just want to focus a bit on the word guarantee. You know, everything I've learned about leadership is about the difference between management and leadership. When you're managing things with targets, you're trying to guarantee outcomes. It's a very different thing from leadership. Leadership's about the power that flows from motivating people, right? You're not trying to guarantee an outcome. You're actually just trying to energize people. On this topic, we do have to ask searching questions, like what's actually going to motivate the actors. So we were talking about Zimbabwe before, you know, the key actors, which is the governments, the corporations that are doing business in that country, the people in that country that have capital, assets, and power. How are we going to motivate them? Because they can solve the problems. They actually have the resources to solve the problem. How do we motivate them? So I would say that for the most part, if we take a highly managerial approach to this, it'll take 200 years. I think we actually need to think about the toolkit of leadership, which takes us away from the verb guarantee. So I just flag that. The other thing I would just say as well is, in general, in North America, we fund way too much research that's about how to do things, not how to do them cheaply. And we are part of the contribution of the developed world is going to be how we assist the developing world in leapfrogging, right? And part of leapfrogging is finding inexpensive ways to solve, problems. So I maybe just stop there because I don't want to dominate, but those would be 2 observations. It's not a total answer to the question, but.
Jay, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing that I would add to that is, and I think everybody's talked about this a little bit, is empowering people. To some extent, Dylan, you just mentioned in North America, there are digital deserts here in the United States. They're in urban regions. I mean, I'm in Chicago. Not far from me, there's places where it's near impossible to get internet. It's not unless you're on a cellular system. But regular internet that we're all working on now doesn't exist. And And, and that's a problem. So the question that we're asking is, how do we empower people to figure out how to drive that within their own communities? How do we take leaders within the communities that are underserved and we work with them? I'm not going to attempt to think that I know all the issues within the communities. So, the challenge for us is to find the leadership within those communities and empower them, and then help them build from within. And I mean, this is to some extent what each of us is doing, is we're acting as agents within our own communities. So that's absolutely what we're doing through this public university and community college network that we've developed, is to look for those ways of empowering people. The old adage is, you can give people fish or you can teach them how to fish. I would much rather have people know how to fish and get their own resources, and then work with them to get those resources. In these in many of these communities, it's really a challenge. They lack basic digital literacy. They don't know how to work online. They don't know how to use the resources. And actually, in our society now, you kind of have to do this. To get access to anything, you have to figure out how to get online. It's really hard. Try to make a medical appointment without going online. I challenge you this evening to try to just do that. You can't pick up a phone and call people anymore. It's really hard to do that. So there's all these sorts of things that we're trying to work with to empower people, and so they can move forward.
You think there's a fundamental shift needed in how education is delivered? Even in the States, it does tier things, right? Especially in underserved communities, to be able to access the resources that I have in this building, right? It's just not easy.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much more of the time here, but there's others to speak. We certainly saw this during the pandemic. We sent kids around the country home, and if you didn't have internet access, it was really challenging to learn from home. The high schoolers who didn't have access at home ended up going to Starbucks or wherever they could find Wi-Fi in a parking lot. It was. So, Paul, the answer to your question is, yeah, we have to have digital access. That's a foundation. And then we do need to think about how we're going to provide an education. And what have we learned from online education for the last year and a half?
Right. I'd be interested in your thought on that particular point, Tafara. This is obviously something very close to you.
You can come again, Robin.
Sorry, I'd be interested in your thoughts on what Jay just said there in terms of both access to the internet, but in sort of realigning education to meet the needs of everybody.
Okay, so the past year in 2020. What I've seen is there is really a division of, or maybe let me say a demarcation. There is the elite, which can afford the proper e-learning with interactive ways of learning. Then we also have the marginalized communities and other schools that are from high density suburbs, which have families or children that are coming from families where they do not have access to internet, like what I spoke about. They do not have even the gadgets for e-learning. So you'll find that there are children who did very well because they were coming from families that afford internet and gadgets for them to learn online. But also there are children who did not learn at all the whole year. And even up to now, the COVID situation is not really stable. And some children are just alternating going to school. So to me, I think we're still far, because if we look at the people who do not have access to proper gadgets and internet, many there, I think I can say 75% of these people, that the ones that do not have the resources, and maybe 25 do have the resources. So we're still a long way to go when it comes to e-learning. And looking also at the adult education, the universities, when COVID-19 came and hit the whole world, universities and colleges were not ready for this. And you'll find that e-learning was something that was then introduced, but how it was done, it was not interactive. It was more of sending lecture notes via WhatsApp and people told to read. And to me, it is like, you know what? Yes, that is a form of e-learning, but is it effective? Are we really making sure that we are going to produce a breed which is competent enough to go and work in the world? So yeah, e-learning has been affected a lot, but I think here we are still far behind, even now in catching up. But I believe that if we are to, the government and the organization, if we are to look at ways of coming up with solutions, there is this gadget called the Mr. Signal. I'm not sure if you know it. So this gadget acts like a Wi-Fi device, but what you do with it is you load your videos, your learning material on that Wi-Fi device. Then you put it on a certain community center, and anyone with a device that connects to Wi-Fi, if they connect to that Mr. Signal, they'll see the information like they are on the internet. They'll play the videos, they'll learn online, but it's something that is not connected on the internet at all. It's just that you upload the data on the gadget. So most probably that will work in communities where there is no access to internet, or maybe where people have got gadgets, but they don't have internet. But if they connect to that gadget with learning material, they can actually learn. So we are still behind, but I think we can do something to solve those issues.
Cool, thank you. Dylan, you.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag on this fantastic topic that, in my country, in Canada, if you look at the data, the streaming of women and other marginalized groups away from science, coding, and technology is happening very young, before puberty. I suspect that's true. It is cultural dimension. I suspect that's true in most countries. It's probably even worse in some countries. I make this point because while I appreciate, Paul, your enthusiasm for thinking disruptively about tertiary education, about universities, probably the biggest place where we need all hands on deck again is getting at how we change early childhood development, because we're trying to fix problems far too late, in my opinion.
I agree with you, absolutely. Jay, please.
Yeah, I'm going to second that. I was, and I work at a university, and for a long time, universities have just looked at the supply chain that we get out of the high school.
Uh-oh, Jay, we have lost you.
I really wanted to hear the rest of that.
I know, yeah. Well, maybe we'll come back to his answer if he comes back to us. Let's move on just to hopefully he'll get back to us to another slightly different topic. So the second goal that was identified by the Gfcc in inclusiveness was this idea of companies, organizations, and countries acting on purpose to advance diversity. So, proactively, deliberately doing something that is going to advance diversity. From the perspective of your organizations, whether you're in the government or private sector or wherever, what do you think that means?
I'll grab the talking stick real quick. All right, so at Lockheed Martin, what that means to us is right. We'll see. But I've had the answer to this question kind of stuck in my mind for the last couple of minutes. So let me do a real quick runaround to the question posted online: how do you measure and guarantee fairness in the workplace? So I'd say, first of all, define what fairness is. What does fairness look like in an organization? And then measuring and guaranteeing it kind of flow from that. Those are easier to do. Is it fair to make training available to every employee? Some people might say that fair, might say that's fair. It certainly isn't inclusive, again, because of the self-selection. So there is an enforcement aspect to that. Enforce that there's equal participation in all opportunities. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far, but I will say that fairness is it's a multidimensional topic, extremely important. I personally, as a director, spend a lot of time thinking about that when we hand out employee recognition or bonuses or raises or assignments on important programs or IRADs, the internal research and development. This is a component of every decision we make. Is there a bias? Let's check our thinking. Is there a bias somewhere that is affecting how I'm proceeding in implementing whatever it is I'm implementing? Okay, I'm glad I got that thought out. So I think that answered a slice of what you just asked.
Sure.
Give me the other slice that I didn't answer, and I'll be happy to round out my thinking.
I mean, I think you did, from the perspective of Lockheed, what's the starting point? How do you ensure that fairness? How do you broaden diversity at the workplace? Which I think you have answered.
Yeah. So, inside the workforce, it's, again, being thoughtful and proactive about thinking inclusively at every step. Outside the workforce, it's a little harder. We can look at things like, hey, we have 25% of the CS graduates from Stanford are women. Let's make sure that we've got 25% women employees in CS related degrees. Well, that's probably not fair either. If there's unfairness at the secondary level and unfairness at the high school level, we're just perpetuating that into the professional world. Okay.
Tough. Dylan, from the perspective of the government, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to I don't think I'll speak for the government per se in this forum, because that's a lot to wear today. But maybe I'll just make this observation. There's something about this pandemic experience which has caused us all to be thinking more locally. And in and of itself, I think there's a lot of good that will come of that. People actually trying to, buy local, and just, there's a lot that's interesting there. But there's also the risk of an erosion of our sense of shared humanity. And that's also part of the challenge that we have in general with the way the internet connects, but also divides us. That's the issue around self-selecting who is in your community. So why am I talking about this? I see it as absolutely essential for us to reflect on our interdependence. I do think the essential question is why? Why are we doing inclusion? Because it is going to take a lot of motivation and a lot of creativity and a lot of effort to get to where we want to get to. But if you think about the benefits of, there's been a lot of talk lately about the harms of globalization. If you think about the benefits of globalization, what we got out of trade liberalization, the billion people that came out of subsistence living, out of poverty, into this global middle class. And of course, the global middle class is $40,000 a year. It's not quite the US middle class, but it is a big, big change. What does that mean for us? It has reduced family size. It's reduced the burden on the environment. It's probably the growth, that reduction in wealth inequality is probably the biggest factor in global climate change, probably the number one thing, more than any other technology you could point to in terms of the long-term issues there. I could go on and on and on. And it's built us more interdependence in terms of, maybe I'll just shorten that. Global security, peace and security needs interdependence. Right? It needs it. We need to be interdependent if we're going to address a lot of issues there. So it's a very long way of saying that we have to find it within ourselves to understand why Tafara's work in Zimbabwe is important to us and our children, right? And that is, so we need to on the one hand embrace this interesting invitation to pay more attention locally, but we've really got to get our heads up again around a global agenda. So let's not just think about inclusiveness. And, Eric, I'm not taking a shot at you. We all think about inclusiveness in our day-to-day jobs, but let's not just think about inclusiveness in terms of the organization we work for. right? Or we really do need to think about this from a global perspective.
Very true. Thank you. Tafara?
Yeah, I wanted to say something along what Dylan was saying, that when it comes to corporates and societies to help support the inclusivity, I think the interdependent relationship is quite important as well. And I think that when we are to identify the problems, for example, the internet connection that I've been talking about, if we want people to learn on digital skills and learn, they maybe internet service providers to whitelist some e-learning platforms, for example. And when they whitelist, we know that someone does not need to pay anything to access information or to learn on any tech skills. So I think there is a lot that we can do depending on how we identify the problems that we have of inclusivity, and looking at the organizations that do have the resources, how can they chip in as well to make sure that there is access and inclusivity in the learning space, and also maybe in the growth space. Yeah, thank you so much.
Jay, did you want to?
Yeah, my quick comment is that all organizations can work with universities and with other schools to develop the talent. And I think, I was hopping back on after getting cut off from the internet, but, Eric was saying that the problem is deeper. It's hard at a company to get inclusive and diverse groups if it's not available at the universities. We have the same problem. The short version is I think we have to reach all the way down into the preschool level and look at the supply chain all the way from there. So we're talking a multi-decade process here, and that's absolutely vital that we work from that level all the way up through and have consistent resources available to those children as they grow.
You're here. Absolutely. This countdown clock is amazing. It's really kind of freaky watching it come down. But so we have 1 minute left. Just in a few seconds, anybody want to quickly give an answer to how can the GFCC help?
I'll just say this, because I do work with the OECD and with other organizations. One of the things that's special about the GFCC is the role of industry and the ability to engage and connect with industry leaders. And so I can't answer your question, but the kernel of GFCC's uniqueness, I think, sits on the integration of government, academic, and industry leadership that's possible at GFCC.
Excellent answer. Thank you. That's really helpful. So I think we're basically out of time, but this has been a great discussion. Touched on developing technologies, make sure we're doing it cheaper, more accessible, extending education, start much earlier, get right back down into the K through 12 as we do here in the States, ensure fairness at all levels, and really look at this as a global problem, an interdependent problem, which I think is really where the GFCC can also come in and play a significant role. So on that note, we are out of time, unfortunately, but just to thank you all for taking the time to do this. It's been a great conversation, and good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Paul, Dylan, Tafara, Jay, Eric, amazing conversation. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to maybe build on what was said during the session about the why. And I think that you have covered that. And there are two aspects that we can comment about. One is the why from, let's say, a moral standpoint. The other one's from an economic standpoint. Both are valuable. But I think one of the things that we also heard earlier today in our morning session, it's about opportunity. That's really connected to the economic opportunity to bring new creators, new doers, new innovators, new consumers new products, new solutions, as we include people and bring all those into the future economy. So amazing conversation. Thank you so much for that. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll have a leadership conversation on future resilient societies. Stay tuned. See you soon.